Money for Nothing would prove to be one of the most iconic rock anthems of the 80s. It also became Dire Straits' most commercially successful single of their career. On top of that, the song also made television history, of course also caused a good deal of controversy. What's interesting is that the song was born out of what some people would think was a throwaway conversation. Today, let's explore the history and the controversy behind the song. Dire Straits formed in London in 1977, led by brothers Mark and David Knopfler, along with John Illsley and Pick Withers. The band's name came from the financial situation at the time they found themselves in. They were literally in dire straits. And that's something, of course, a lot of rock musicians find themselves in early in their career. Their big break would come when a demo tape found its way to BBC Radio London DJ Charlie Gillett. He played Sultans of Swing on a show, and it soon caught the attention of record executives. Dire Straits' self-titled debut album was released in 1978, and Sultans of Swing soon became a hit on both sides of the Atlantic, giving the group their first top 5 hit in America. The band's unique sound, blending elements of pub rock, jazz, folk, and blues, set them apart from their contemporaries. Their second album, Communicate, quickly followed in 1979, but it was their third record, Making Movies, released in 1980, that truly showcased the evolving sound and Mark Knopfler's growing skills as a songwriter. Songs like Romeo and Juliet demonstrated his ability to craft intricate narratives within his songs, a skill that would come to full fruition in Money for Nothing. 1982's Love Over Gold saw the band experimenting with longer and more complex compositions. The album's opening track, Telegraph Road, would clock in at over 14 minutes. By the mid-80s, the musical landscape was changing though. MTV had launched in 1981, ushering a new era of music videos. This visual medium would play a crucial role in the success of Dire Straits' biggest hit. It's funny because Mark Knopfler wasn't a fan of MTV and music videos, and the band up until this point didn't even appear on their own album covers. By the mid-80s, Dire Straits was pretty popular in their home country of the UK, but they had more of a tepid response stateside, and part of that had to do with the fact that they really hadn't fully embraced MTV yet. In 1985, Dire Straits began work on their 5th studio album, Brothers in Arms. Little did they know that one of the tracks would become not only their biggest hit, but also a cultural touchstone of the 80s. It was one of the first albums that was also directed at the CD market, and it was one of the first records also recorded on a Sony 24 digital track tape machine, at a time when a lot of albums were still being recorded on analog. Knopfler had this drive to produce better sounding records, so embracing technology really wasn't surprising. Dire Straits assembled in the British territory of Montserrat, the same place the Police had recorded, co-produced by Mark Knopfler himself and Neil Dorfman, whose credits included Bruce Hornsby, Paul McCartney, and of course Sting. Brothers in Arms produced 5 charting singles, including the first single, So Far Away, the title track, Walk of Life, Your Latest Trick, and of course today's topic and the second single, Money for Nothing, which shot the album into the stratosphere. Knopfler recalled in an interview how he came up with the song while he was shopping for an exercise machine at a department store in the Upper East Side of New York City. At the store was a wall of televisions tuned into MTV. He overheard a conversation between a delivery guy and a guy who also worked at the store, telling Bill Flanagan, the lead character in Money for Nothing is a guy who works in the hardware department. He's singing the song. I wrote the song when I was actually in the store. I borrowed a bit of paper and pen and started to write the song down in the store. I wanted to use a lot of the language that the real guy actually used when I heard him, because it was more real. As they were watching MTV, Knopfler heard the delivery guy say, "What are those, Hawaiian noises? That ain't working." Knopfler wanted the lyrics to reflect the perspective of the working class envying the lifestyle of rock stars and pop stars, which to them on the surface seemed easy. As for what video they were watching in the department store that day, Bassist Nikki Sixx claimed it was his band Motley Crue, who was a mainstay of MTV back in its early days. According to producer Neil Dorfsman, who told Sound on Sound, Knopfler was going for a sort of ZZ Top sound on the song, which is funny because they were also staples of MTV thanks to their videos Gimme All Your Lovin', Sharp Dressed Man, and Legs. The sound of the guitar on Money for Nothing was largely born out of accident, with Dorfsman recalling, one mic was pointing down at the floor, another was not quite on the speaker, another one was somewhere else. It wasn't how I would want to set things up. It was probably just left from the night before when I'd been preparing things for the next day and had not really finished the setup. What we heard was exactly what ended up on the record. Another part of the song involves the rock star Sting. MTV ran ads in the 80s called I Want My MTV, which had different rock stars of the day shouting, I want my MTV. Knopfler recalled watching MTV one day telling Ultimate Classic Rock, I'd seen the Police doing an MTV advert saying I want my MTV, just saying it all together, and I thought, if I set that to the notes of Don't Stand So Close to Me, it'll work. I remember saying to the guys, I'd really like to get Sting to do this. We knew them anyways because we'd done a lot of gigs together in Germany. One of them said, that's fine because he's here on holiday. Sting ended up joining the band for dinner when they were in the studio, and they played him Money for Nothing, with Sting supposedly telling the band, you've done it this time, you bastards. Originally, Sting did the song as a favor, not expecting a songwriting credit. But then his publisher Virgin stepped in, with Sting recalling, Virgin, who I'd been at war with for years and who I have no respect for, decided that was a song they owned, Don't Stand So Close to Me. They said they wanted a percentage of the song, much to my embarrassment. Released in June of 1985, Money for Nothing shot to the #1 spot in the US on September 21st on the Hot 100 chart and #4 on the UK singles chart. Dire Straits managed to do something in 1985 that, according to the Chicago Tribune, no other artist had done yet that year. They had a #1 song and a #1 album at the same time. 1984 saw Bruce Springsteen and Prince accomplish such a feat. Money for Nothing spent 9 weeks at the #1 spot in the States and an astounding 34 weeks at the top spot in Australia. Newspapers at the time credited the band's superstar status to a few other things, Knopfler's outside projects being one of them, as it was important in raising the band's profile since he contributed to the Tina Turner comeback album Private Dancer. He also received an accolade for his work on the soundtrack for the movie Local Hero. Couple this with the more commercial path the band took with Brothers in Arms and listing Sting as a co-writer on Money for Nothing. Dire Straits also appeared at Live Aid, where they performed the song with Sting, and of course there was the groundbreaking music video for the song. In the book I Want My MTV, Siobhan Barron, the co-founder of Limelight Productions, remarked having a discussion with Ed Bicknell, Dire Straits' then manager. The group's manager asked her what he needed to do to get Dire Straits on MTV because they weren't selling a ton of records in America, and their videos up until this point really hadn't caught fire on the network either. Barron told him, get Mark Knopfler to write an MTV-able song, and then let us make the video. The brass at MTV loved Brothers in Arms. The band released So Far Away as the first single, and 2 execs at MTV met with Mo Austin and Lenny Waronker, who ran Warner Brothers, and told them that song that mentions MTV is a smash, to which the label executives responded, you weren't offended? Offended? Flattered might be a better word, the execs at MTV responded. But there was a problem. Mark Knopfler didn't like doing music videos, so the head of their label told director Steve Barron to go to Budapest, Hungary, where the band was on tour, and meet with the group and shoot some performance footage for the Money for Nothing video. At the same time, Barron was going to try and convince Mark to do a concept video using a new computer technology called Paintbox. It's basically used to do colorizations in commercials and create logos for corporations. Barron ended up going to dinner with Knopfler and his girlfriend, where he told the couple that MTV was getting stale and needed to be shaken up. Knopfler remained pretty silent during the conversation, on the verge of saying no, but then his girlfriend exclaimed, wow, you're so right about that. That's exactly what MTV needs. That was enough to convince the director to proceed with the video. The music video for Money for Nothing was one of the first to feature computer-generated animation. The video depicted the situation which inspired the song: two working class men animated in a blocky 3D style, watching MTV and, of course, commenting on the rock stars they saw. Since the technology was cutting edge in 1985, the song stood out on MTV, so much so that it took home Video of the Year at the 1986 VMAs. Funny enough, Barron also directed another video that year that was nominated for Best Video, a-ha's Take On Me. For the record, Barron thought a-ha's video was better. Now, of course, the song's lyrics and what Knopfler was writing about came under fire in 1985. It was the second verse, which repeatedly uses the F word, a derogatory term for a gay person. But in reality, the tone and the meaning behind the song was lost on a lot of people. Knopfler actually studied journalism in college and was later hired as a junior reporter in Leeds at the Yorkshire Evening Post, so he knew about telling a story. He remarked to the New York Times in 1985, they had a hard hat macho mentality, referring to the two men he overheard at the department store. I went to the front of the store and asked for a pen and piece of paper so I could write down what they were saying. I was intrigued by the notion that these musicians were impossibly rich without actually having to work. Some in the gay press blasted Dire Straits for normalizing homophobic language, but to Knopfler and the New York Times, the irony of the song seemed lost on its critics, with Mark adding, the same thing happened when Randy Newman recorded Short People, a song that was clearly about the stupidity of prejudice. An editor of Gay News in England attacked the song. What amazes me is that an intelligent journalist can misunderstand the song. As for the character in the song, Knopfler has referred to him as stupid and ignorant. While radio censored the use of the F word and shortened the song to about half its length as it clocks in at over 8 minutes on the album, the same couldn't be said for MTV, who opted to leave the F word in. MTV had a standards and practices department that reviewed every single frame of every video that was submitted to them. MTV was criticized that their censoring of videos was inconsistent, but Michelle Vonfield, who was the head of the standards and practices branch of the network, recalled that they made decisions of censorship based on the context in which the word is used. In the case of Money for Nothing, as MTV saw it, the F word wasn't used as a slur in the song. Some people, however, at MTV disagreed about the decision. And while we're on the topic of MTV, Money for Nothing was also the first music video played on MTV Europe when the channel launched in April of 1987. Fast forward to nearly 10 years ago in my home country of Canada, in 2011, it was announced by the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council that Money for Nothing was too offensive to be played on Canadian airwaves, at least the uncensored version, singling out the use of the F word. It turns out a resident from St. John's, Newfoundland had filed a complaint over the use of the word. The council ruled that the unedited version of the song was unacceptable to play on private Canadian radio stations. Despite the ruling, several stations, including a radio station in Edmonton and Halifax, played the unedited version on repeat for nearly an hour straight. The commission soon had to reconsider the ruling, and while the use of the word was deemed inappropriate in their eyes, because of the context in which it was used, they left it up to the radio stations to determine whether they play the edited or unedited version. Getting back to the song, Money for Nothing wasn't just a commercial success, it also left a lasting legacy in the music world. The song's riff, played on a Gibson Les Paul Jr., is one of the most recognizable in rock history. Rolling Stone magazine even ranked it amongst the greatest guitar songs of all time. Meanwhile, the album Brothers in Arms went 9 times platinum in America, selling over 30 million copies worldwide, making it arguably one of the most successful records of the decade. Dire Straits, meanwhile, broke up in 1995, and the chance of a reunion seems unlikely, as Mark Knopfler has enjoyed success as a solo artist. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll Stories. Take care.